Hello, my name is Chewy Delaplane. Today we're going to talk about the similarities between Hamlet, the play by William Shakespeare, and the situation in North Korea. I'll be basing my observations of North Korea on the novel Nothing to Envy by Barbara Demick, a book that chronicles the experiences of ordinary people in North Korea. Now, there are many parallels that I can point out. Both Hamlet and North Korea involve tyrannical rulers who are not necessarily the country's first choice to be leader. You have Claudius in Hamlet, and Kim Jong-il and later Kim Jong-un in North Korea, both of whom live in the shadow of their former leader, Kim Il-sung. In addition, these rulers watch their subjects' every move. The rulers ask people to betray their friends, family, and neighbors to them. They highly restrict people's love lives. They force their subjects to live in an altered form of consciousness. For Hamlet, it's madness, while for North Korean people, it's a freedomless state of continual starvation and deprivation. They also try as hard as they can to pretend that despite all these shortcomings, that everything is fine. For example, Claudius glazes over the death of the king in Act 1, Scene 2, and the North Korean denies the food shortage and the famine. So let's start with my first point. In both North Korea and Hamlet, there are tyrannical rulers who live in the shadow of their former leader. In Hamlet, Claudius killed the dear King Hamlet, who is beloved by his kingdom, and after he kills him, the whole kingdom was, quote, contracted in one brow of woe, meaning the whole nation was sad and bereft after their king died. Similarly, in North Korea, Kim Jong-il took over after Kim Il-sung, and Kim Il-sung was the most beloved leader in North Korea. He was essentially the founder of North Korea as its own nation, and he was worshipped like a god in a cult of personality. After his death, people were wailing in the streets, pounding their chests, beating their skulls on the pavement, grieving, and Kim Jong-il wasn't who the people wanted. He was selected by Kim Il-sung. Now, there are rumors that at a time when Kim Il-sung was getting ready to negotiate with the U.S. and South Korea, who are North Korea's sworn enemies, Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung were in the same place, by themselves, and shortly after, Kim Il-sung was dead. We don't know exactly what happened, but if Kim Jong-il had anything to do with it, we think he did it to gain power. The very same reason as to why Claudius kills King Hamlet. In addition, in both Hamlet and in North Korea, people are willing to betray their friends and neighbors just to satisfy authority. For example, in Hamlet, Claudius says to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, quote, I entreat you both to gather so much as from occasion you may glean. This is referring to wanting them to spy on Hamlet. And Guildenstern says, we both obey, and here give up ourselves in the full bent to lay our service freely at your feet. He is obeying without question. He didn't even challenge Claudius. He simply accepts the duty given to him of spying on his best friend from childhood simply because he has to obey authority or face harsh punishment. Now, Hamlet is on to this. He says, What have you, my good friends, deserved at the hands of fortune that she sends you to prison hither? What make you at Elsinore? Were you not sent for? Come, nay, speak. He asks them over and over again if they've been sent for. And they deny it, of course, because they know if they come clean, then they'll have given themselves up. And Hamlet says finally, I know the good queen and king have sent for you. Now, Hamlet does something that perhaps the people of North Korea wouldn't be willing to do. He openly admits that he is aware of the spying that is going on. And this is part of what makes Hamlet so different. He is the only one really willing to challenge the authority, yet he is still subject to the same spying and betrayal as everyone else. In Nothing to Envy, there's a story about a man named Chang-bo. He's with his neighbors watching a TV report, and just so you know, in North Korea, TV is controlled by the state. They only give the official reports. They don't say what's actually going on because they want to convince the people that everything is fine and nothing is wrong in a desperate attempt to maintain their legitimacy and their control. So this report that they're watching is talking about how all of these boots are being manufactured when in reality the children have no shoes to wear. They're just making shoes from scrap pieces of rubber and cloth that they find in the streets. So Chang-bo is watching this report, and since TVs are a scarce luxury in North Korea, several neighbors and friends were gathered around one single TV set. You're never watching alone. So after watching this report, Chang-bo just kind of mutters under his breath, well, if there are so many boots, how come my children never got any? And just like that, within a couple of days, the party enforcers come to his house, claiming he has badmouthed the regime. And a quote from the book says, Changbo's wife never figured out which neighbor blabbed. Her husband's remark was quickly reported to the head of the Inminban, the neighborhood watchdogs, who in turn passed on the information to the Ministry for the Protection of State Security. Spying on one's countrymen is something of a national pastime. To be denounced by a neighbor for bad-mouthing the regime was nothing extraordinary. Now this just goes to show, like in Hamlet, neighbors will betray each other because that is what they are led to believe is right. That is what the authority demands of them. The Communist Party makes everyone in North Korea snitch on their friends if they say anything that is remotely contrary to the regime, no matter how insignificant, because the regime is so obsessed with maintaining power. Another way that the tyrannical leaders, like the North Korean government and Claudius and Hamlet, maintain power is they restrict people's love lives. So in North Korea, when these two young adults, Mi-ran and Jun-song, the book says that their relationship took on a 19th century epistolary quality. The only way they could stay in touch was by letter. They were not really allowed to be seen in public, not just because dating itself was taboo, but because Jun-song was from a higher class than Mi-ran, and the two of them together would bring shame. And as a result, they had to revert to something old-fashioned and extreme in order to just talk to each other. In addition, the book says that North Korea doesn't really have a dating culture. Many marriages are still arranged. Couples are not supposed to make any public displays of affection, and defectors insist that there's no such thing as an unmarried student getting pregnant. The prudishness is part of traditional Korean culture. So the state in North Korea takes an active role in restricting and prohibiting people's dating and marriages. You're especially not supposed to be together if you're not from the same level in the hierarchy. So say you are a good, by-the-book party member, but you have a crush on someone whose dad came from South Korea, you're not allowed to be with them because South Korea is the enemy, and people of South Korean descent are the lowest of the low. Similarly in Hamlet, Polonius tells Ophelia that Hamlet is too high up for her. He says, I would not in plain terms from this time forth have you so slender in any moment leisure. As to give words or talk with the Lord Hamlet, look to it, I charge you, come your ways. And Ophelia just says, I shall obey, my lord. So Polonius just takes complete control. He just tells her who she can and can't date, and Ophelia just accepts it without questioning. In both, the authority figure takes complete control of the people that they can and can't see, and the people accept it blindly. Now, in Nothing to Envy, while the people do understand the restrictions implemented by the state, they find ways to get around it. Since Mi-ran and Jun-song do live in such a remote part of the country, so far away from the city and party control, they're able to break the rules a little bit and do things illegally. But they understand that they're doing it with an extreme amount of risk involved. But for them, I guess, the risk is worth it. That makes them different from Hamlet because Hamlet and Ophelia just end things. Well, Hamlet ends things because they know they can't be with each other. Another similarity is the theme of people needing to act crazy as a defense mechanism or survival method. For example, in Hamlet, in the beginning of the play, Hamlet tells Horatio that he may put on a front of madness, and we don't really know why at that point, but throughout the book, Hamlet acts crazy when speaking to Polonius, Rosencrantz, Guildenstern, and Claudius. We know this because he is speaking in prose, and he's saying things that don't make sense or aren't related to what just happened. However, he then switches to verse and acts relatively normal when he is with Horatio or when he is just by himself. And so, from these interactions, we can infer that he is pretending to be mad so that Claudius won't perceive him as a threat and won't come after his life. Because if Claudius just thinks that Hamlet is crazy, he's not going to think Hamlet's going to attack him, and if Hamlet's just acting crazy, no one will suspect him of killing Claudius, so that if or when he does, they'll be able to blame it on the madness, but they won't blame it on him. Also, acting mad allows Hamlet to avoid his problems and his guilt, and allows him to avoid making a real choice about whether or not he really should kill Claudius. In North Korea, too, you can see people acting crazy as a defense mechanism. As it says in Nothing to Envy, quote, after Kim Il-sung died, people were on their knees, banging their heads on the pavement. Their wails cut through the air like sirens. Jun-sung sat down too, unsure of what to do. He found it curious that he wasn't the one crying. He rubbed his eyes just to make sure. He wasn't crying. What was wrong with him? His entire future depended on his ability to cry. It was a matter of life and death. Jun-sung was terrified. He figured out that if he kept his eyes open long enough, they would burn and tear up. Eventually, it became mechanical. He felt himself falling to his knees, rocking back and forth, sobbing just like everyone else. Nobody would be the wiser. So that quote shows that Jun-sung wasn't actually sad that Kim Il-sung died, but he had to pretend to be sad and wail and sob so that people would think he was a supporter, not a dissident. Like he said, it was a matter of life and death because dissidents in North Korea end up in these awful, despicable labor camps. Again, this is the result of such an oppressive regime that it forces people to either pretend to be crazy so that later on they eventually do go crazy. And that brings me to my next point. How do we know what is real and what is pretend when someone is forcing you to believe or act a certain way? We don't know in North Korea whether the people are genuinely devoted to the regime or to Kim Il-sung. We don't know whether that's how they genuinely feel, or whether it's because it's what they've been told, or whether they're pretending to act that way because if they don't, they'll die. For example, in the example I just said with Jun-sung, he doesn't necessarily love Kim Il-sung, but after a while of pretending to love him, he feels like he should love him, and feels like Kim Il-sung was a genuinely good leader. In addition, when tourists walk along the streets of Pyongyang, nothing is real. There are showcase department stores that are full of paper and plastic food. There are giant hotel and apartment buildings that are completely empty. And the facts that children learn in history books are deliberately false anti-American propaganda stories. They've been brainwashed and they live completely detached from the reality of the world. And we can explore that in Hamlet. We don't think that in the beginning of the play that Hamlet is actually crazy simply because he indicates to Horatio that he is about to pretend, that he is about to put on a front. But then throughout the play, he does some things that are indicative of a mad person. He tears Ophelia apart. He accidentally kills Polonius. He agrees to a sword fight with one of the best swordsmen in the area, Laertes, and then blatantly ignores Horatio, warning him not to go to the fight. So he kind of just goes crazy. And he's also standing next to a grave in Act 5, just thinking about death for a really, really long time. And someone who is doing all of those things and thinking constantly about death and saying things that don't make sense, there is a high chance that they are mad. But we don't know whether he is truly mad or whether it's all pretend. Now, I believe that simply by pretending to be mad, by putting on a front, by changing his actions, he changes his thought. So even though he may not have been truly mad to begin with, by virtue of doing the crazy things, it makes his mind go crazy. It's like method acting with real-life applications. So something that may have started out as externally imposed becomes internalized and becomes a true part of his character. And I think that happens whenever there is someone or something repressing your true thought, repressing your freedom of expression, freedom of choice. You become brainwashed and you go crazy as a result. So something that we can gain from reading Hamlet that gives us insight into North Korea is that it is a universal tendency of those in power to desperately need to maintain their power by watching their subjects' every move. Under these repressive regimes, it is virtually impossible to live a normal life and stay sane, with rulers constantly watching you and controlling your life. They're controlling your actions, your thought, everything. Hamlet faces a moral and ethical dilemma, whether to remain passive and continue his suffering, or whether to take the risk to avenge his father's death and kill Claudius, hopefully eliminating the threat of the oppressive regime that Claudius has ensued. Unfortunately, due to the mass starvation faced by so many North Korean people, they are not even so lucky as to have the choice that Hamlet had. They can only think about where they're getting their next meal. There is hope, however, for the better-fed elite. If they disagree with the leadership of the current Kim Jong-un, They could grapple with this choice themselves and, in doing so, decide the future of North Korea. We'll have to stay tuned to see what happens. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.